29 December 1665. Today, despite the scribe's objurgations, I went to see him again. Alone this time. I wanted to understand why he acted as he did. I had no idea how he'd react when he saw me, and as I made my way from the merchant's quarter to the citadel, I had a presentiment that I'd find his place empty. One doesn't usually remember presentiments nor mention them unless they come true. In this case, my presentiment was wrong. Abdul-Latif was there. An oldish woman was talking to him, and he signed to me to wait until he'd finished dealing with her. When she left, he jotted down a few words in his notebook, then stood up and led me outside. "If you are here to give back that 200 aspers, you're wasting your time," he said. "No," I replied. "I came just to thank you again for your kindness. Yesterday my friends made such a to-do I couldn't tell you how grateful I am. I've been trying for months to get somewhere in this business, and every time I've gone away cursing. But thanks to you, I went away from here thanking God and the port, even though I wasn't much nearer my goal. It's very unusual these days to come across a man of integrity. I can understand my friend's exuberance, but it offended your modesty, and you asked him to stop." I hadn't actually asked the question that was on the tip of my tongue. The man smiled, sighed, and laid a hand on my shoulder. "I wasn't being modest, I was being careful," he said. He paused and seemed to be searching for words. Then he glanced around to make sure no one was watching. "In a place where most people will take money improperly, anyone who refuses it is seen by others as a threat, a possible informer, and they'll do anything they can to get rid of him. I've actually been warned. If you want to keep a head on your shoulders, do as we do and don't act as if you're either better or worse than the rest of us. So, as I have no wish to die, though I don't want to sin and go to perdition either, I prefer to act as I did with you yesterday. Inside this place, I sell myself, and outside it, I redeem myself." What strange times we live in, when good must disguise itself in the tawdry rags of evil. Maybe it's time the world came to an end. 30th December 1665. This morning Sabbatai left for Constantinople on an unknown fate. I am told he sailed on a galley together with 3 rabbis, one from Aleppo, one from Jerusalem, and one from Poland. There were 3 other people with him, including Maimun's father. My friend would have liked to go too, to be with his father, but the self-styled Messiah was against it. The sea looks stormy, and there are dark clouds on the horizon, but all the passengers sang as they went on board, as if the presence of their leader did away with such things as storms and swells. Even before they left, rumor was rife. Maimun told me of all the stories circulating in the upper part of the city, so that I might share in his anxiety and bewilderment. Sabbatai's supporters claim he is going to Constantinople to meet the Sultan, tell him the new era of resurrection and deliverance is come, and urge him to submit without offering any resistance. They also say that in the course of this interview, the Almighty will manifest his will in the form of some great marvel, causing the terrified sultan to fall on his knees and hand over his crown to the one who is to replace him as God's representative on earth. Sabbatai's opponents, on the other hand, say he did not set out as a conqueror. It was the Ottoman authorities through the Qadi who ordered him within 3 days to leave Smyrna for Constantinople, where he would be apprehended on landing. This is a plausible explanation, the only plausible one, in fact. What sane man could believe in a miraculous interview during which the most powerful monarch in the world would lay his crown at the feet of a caterwauling nobody with a red face? No, I don't believe that's possible, and Maimun is even more skeptical than I am. But this evening, most people in the Jewish quarter do believe that version of what's happening. Those who have doubts hide them and pretend to be preparing for the rejoicings. Boumé too seems to believe the world is on the point of collapse. I'd be surprised if he didn't. Whenever a choice is possible, he always opts for the most stupid alternative. But he can still argue and make us think, even give us pause. If the authorities mean to arrest Sabbatai as soon as he lands, he says, why did they let him leave freely on the ship of his choice instead of sending him straight to prison under escort? How can they be sure where he'll go ashore? What are you trying to tell us, Boumé? That the Sultan is going to give in without more ado as soon as this fellow tells him to? You must have lost your reason too. Reason has only another day to live. The new year is about to begin, the new era. What used to seem reasonable will soon seem ridiculous. What once seemed unreasonable will appear self-evident. Those who have left it till the last moment to open their eyes will be blinded by the light. Habib laughed and I shrugged my shoulders and turned to Maymun, expecting him to share my opinion, but his thoughts seemed to be elsewhere, no doubt with his father, aged, ailing, and misled. In his mind's eye he could see the old man going aboard the galley without a backward glance or a wave of farewell, and heading perhaps for humiliation or death. My friend didn't know what to think anymore, or what to hope for, or rather, he did know, but it was not much comfort. Since we've been living together, I have talked to Maymun often enough to know exactly the dilemma he's in. If his father turned out to be right, if Sabbatai turned out to be the king and messiah, if the expected miracle occurred, if the Sultan fell on his knees and recognized that former times are past, the kingdoms of this world are no more, that the powerful will be powerful no longer, the proud no longer proud, the meek no longer humiliated. If the whole mad dream could, by the will of heaven, come true, how could Maymun fail to weep for joy? But that's not what is going to happen, he tells me. In my friend, Sabbatai inspires no trust, no reverence, no expectation, no joy whatsoever. We're still a long way away from Amsterdam, from the Amsterdam of our hopes, he says, laughing so as not to weep. 31st December 1665. God, the last day. I have been going round in circles since this morning, unable to eat, talk, or think. I do nothing but mull over the reasons why I am so nervous. Whether you believe in Sabbatai or not, there is no doubt that his appearing at this precise moment, on the eve of the fateful year, and in the city named by the Apostle John as one of the 7 churches primarily concerned by the message of the apocalypse, can't be wholly due to a bunch of coincidences. Nor can what has happened to me in recent months be explained without a reference to the approach of the new age, whether it's the age of the beast or of redemption, and to the signs that herald it. Do I need to go through these portents again? While the rest of my household was taking a siesta, I sat down at my desk to write down the thoughts inspired in me by the events of the day. I thought I'd produce quite a long screed, but when I came to that question mark, I found my hand pausing before beginning to list yet again the signs that have punctuated my life and the lives of my companions for the last few months. In the end, I put away my writing things, wondering if I'd ever have a chance to dip my pen in the ink again. I went out and walked through the almost empty streets, then along the beach, which was just as deserted, and where I was soothed and even lulled by the sound of the waves and the wind. Back home, I lay down on my bed for a few minutes, almost sitting really, because my head was propped up on so many pillows. I got up again in an excellent humor, resolved not to let my last day, if that's what it was, be frittered away in melancholy and fear. I decided to take my whole family out to dinner at the French eating house, but Maymun excused himself, saying he had to go to the Jewish quarter to meet a rabbi just arrived from Constantinople, who might be able to tell him what kind of reception awaited Sabbatai and his crew. Boumé said he was going to stay in his room, meditating until daybreak, as well as we all ought to do, and Habib, either mourning his loss or merely sulking, didn't want to go out either. I didn't let all these refusals get me down. I told Martha I hoped she'd come with me, and she didn't say no. She even seemed highly delighted, as if today's date didn't affect her in the least. I asked Master Minois to serve us quite simply the best he had, the dish he was most proud of as a cook, and the best wine in his cellar, as if it were our last dinner, I thought, though I didn't say so and wasn't unduly perturbed at the prospect. I think I've come to terms with it. As everyone seemed to have gone to bed by the time we got home, I went straight to Martha's room and latched the door from inside. Then we vowed to sleep in one another's arms until the morning, or at least thought, I half jokingly and half terrified, until whatever it was that took the place of morning in the year of the beast. But after we'd made love, my companion went to sleep and I couldn't. I went on holding her close for a while, an hour perhaps, then laid her gently aside, got up, put on some clothes, and went back to my writing things. Again, I intended to sum up the events of the last few months, listing the various signs and portents in the hope that the act of setting them down on the paper would suddenly reveal their hidden meaning. But for the second time today, I gave up. I just recorded the run of the mill things I'd done this afternoon and evening, and now I shan't write anything anymore. I wonder what time it is. I don't know. I shall slip back into bed beside Martha, taking care not to wake her, and hoping my thoughts will calm down enough to let me sleep. Friday, 1 January 1666. The year of the beast has begun, and it's a morning just like any other. The same light outside the shutters, the same noises, and I heard a cock crow not far away. But Boumet is not put out. He claims he never said that the world was going to end from one day to the next. It's true he never said it in so many words, but even yesterday he was still behaving as if the gates of hell were on the point of opening up. He'd be well advised to drop that disdainful expression of his and admit he knows as little as the rest of us. But that wouldn't occur to him. He's still prophesizing in his own peculiar way. The new era will come and it's in at its own pace, proclaims my nephew the oracle. It could take a day or a week or a month or even the whole year. But what's certain, he says, is that the transformation of the world has begun, and everything will have been completed by the end of 1666. He and his brother now maintain that, unlike me, their uncle, they were never afraid, whereas in fact they could scarcely draw breath all day yesterday and kept going round in circles, looking as if devils were after them. Maymoun, who spent yesterday evening and today in the Jewish quarters, tells me that for the past few weeks their community in Constantinople has been hanging on the news from Smyrna, and that all of them, rich and poor, learned and ignorant, saints and sinners alike, with the exception of a few wiser heads, are awaiting Sabbatai's arrival with infinite hope. Houses and streets are being swept and garnished as if for a wedding, and rumor has it there, as in Smyrna and many other places apparently, that the Sultan is preparing to lay his turban and diadem at the feet of the Messiah King in exchange for his life and a place in the coming of the kingdom of God upon earth. Sunday, 3 January 1666. In the Capuchin's church, the preacher attacks those who predict the end of the world, those who juggle with figures, and anyone who is taken in by such mystifications. He says this new year will be just like any other, and he scorns the Messiah of Smyrna. The congregation smile at his sarcasms, but cross themselves in terror whenever he mentions the beast or the apocalypse. 4 January. At noon something happened because of me that might have led to the direst consequences. But I had the presence of mind, thank God, to right the boat before it sank. I'd gone for a walk with Marta and Hatim, and we ended up near the new mosque in the quarter where a number of booksellers ply their trade. As I looked at their stacks of volumes, I suddenly felt the urge to question them about the 100th name. My previous misadventures in Tripoli and Constantinople should have made me more careful, but my desire to own the book got the better of my prudence. I told myself that in the atmosphere currently reigning in Smyrna, even though things had been quieter since Sabbatai left, some things that were hitherto suspect or banned might now be tolerated. I further convinced myself that in any case my fears were exaggerated and probably even unnecessary. I now know this was not the case. Scarcely had I uttered Mazandarani's name and the title of his book than the expression of most of the people I spoke to became evasive, suspicious, or even downright threatening. No one said, still less did, anything definite. Everything was veiled, elusive, impossible to pin down. But I am certain now that the authorities have clearly warned the booksellers against the book and against anyone looking for it in Smyrna, Constantinople, Tripoli, Aleppo, and all the other cities in the empire. I hastily changed my approach for fear of being accused of belonging to some secret fraternity planning to overthrow the Sultan. I embarked on a minute and fanciful description of the binding of the book as it had been described to me, saying that it was merely this that interested me. I doubt if my interlocutors were taken in by my ruse. Nonetheless, one of them was a keen enough man of business to hurry to his stall and fetch me a tome with a binding not dissimilar to what I described. It was a damascened wood, with the title inlaid in mother of pearl and fine hinges like those used for boxes and caskets. I'd once had a book bound in this very unusual manner in my own shop, but of course it wasn't the 100th name. The subject of the work the bookseller brought me today is the Turkish poet Yunus Emre, who died in the 8th century of the Hijra, the 14th century of our own era. I just skimmed through some pages enough to see it wasn't simply a collection of poems, but a mixture of poems, commentaries, and biographical anecdotes. I looked especially closely at the binding and passed my hand over it several times to make sure it had been damascened properly and the surface was quite smooth. And of course, I bought it. After all I'd said, and with all those people watching, I had no alternative. The man who sold it to me for 6 piastres made a good bargain, but so did I. For 6 piastres I learned a lesson worth my own weight in gold, never to mention the 100th name in Ottoman country again. Tuesday, 5 January 1666. Yesterday evening, just before going to sleep, I read a few passages from the book I bought yesterday. I'd occasionally heard Yunus Emre spoken of before, but never read anything by him until now. For decades, I'd been reading the works of poets from all over the world, sometimes learning their verses by heart, but I've never read anything like this before. I wouldn't like to say it's the greatest I've come across, but for me it's the most surprising. A fly undid an eagle, and made it bite the dust, and that's the truth. I saw the dust myself. The fish climbed the poplar tree to eat some pickled pitch. The stork gave birth to a baby ass. What language did it speak? While I was glad when I woke to have discovered this book, it had come to me during the night that I ought not to keep it, but instead to make a present of it to someone who deserved it and would enjoy the language it was written in better than I. Abdul Latif, the honest scribe. I had a debt to him that I'd be glad to pay off without quite knowing how to manage it. I couldn't give him jewelry or some expensive fabric. His principles would have made him refuse them, and a Muslim wouldn't care to accept an illuminated Quran from a Genoese. But what could be better, thought I, than a secular book that made pleasurable reading, and that would remind him of my gratitude whenever he dipped into it? So in the morning I set off for the citadel, my gift under my arm. At first he looked astonished. I even sensed that he was somewhat suspicious, as if he were afraid I might ask for some favor in return that would trouble his conscience. He scrutinized me at such length that I began to regret my impulse. But then he relaxed. embraced me, and called me his friend, telling a fellow sitting by the door to bring us some coffee. When, after some minutes, I rose to leave, he took my arm and led me out. He still seemed quite overcome by completely unexpected gesture. Before I left him, he asked me for the first time where I usually lived, where I was staying in Smyrna, and why I was interested in the fate of Marta's husband. I explained straight out that he'd abandoned her years ago, that she'd had no news of him, and so didn't know whether she was still married to him or not. This made him regret all the more that he'd been able to do nothing to remove her uncertainty. On my way home, I started reconsidering the suggestion Hatib made a few weeks ago to get Marta a false death certificate for her husband. But if ever I did have to resort to such methods, I couldn't go to this new and upright friend of mine for help. Up till now, I have tried to explore less hazardous approaches, but how much longer must we wait? How much many more scribes and judges and janissaries must I question and bribe utterly in vain? It's not the expense that bothers me. God has provided amply for me, but I am going to have to return to Gibelet before too long, and then I am going to need some document or other that will give the widow back her liberty. There's no question of her putting herself at the mercy of her in-laws again. Back home, my head still buzzing and finding everyone waiting for me to arrive before they sat down to dinner, I was tempted for a moment to ask each of them if he or she thought the time had come for us to go back to Gibelet. But looking around at them, I decided to remain silent. Maymoon sat on my right, Marta on my left. If I suggested going home to her, it would be as if I were deserting her, or worse, handing her over defenseless to her persecutors. And how could I say to him who was now living under my roof that the time had come for me to leave Smyrna? It would be as if I was tired of being his host and wanted to turn him out. I was just thinking that I was right to say nothing, that if I'd spoken unthinkingly, I'd have regretted it to my dying day, when Boumé turned to me and said suddenly, "It's London we ought to go to. That's where the book we're looking for is." I was startled first. First, because my nephew had looked at me as if he'd heard and was answering the question I'd bitten back. It was only a feeling, I know, a false, far-fetched impression. There was no way that crazy youth could have divined my thoughts, but there was a mixture of assurance and irony in his voice and expression that made me uneasy. There was also a second reason for my surprise. I'd made all the others promise to say nothing to Boumé about the finding of the statuette and the fact that Wheeler might have the book by Mazandarani. Who could have told the secret? Habib, of course. I looked at him, and he looked straight back at me, impudently, defiantly. I should have been prepared for it. After what happened the day after Christmas, when I boxed his ears and dismissed the maid, I ought to have expected him to seek revenge. Turning to Boumé, I told him angrily I had no intention of following his advice again, and that when I left Smyrna, it would be to go back home to Gibelet and nowhere else. Not to London, nor Venice, nor Peru, nor China, nor to the land of the Bulgars, I thundered. No one around the table risked contradicting me. Everyone, Habib included, sat with their eyes meekly cast down. But it would have been a mistake to conclude that the discussion was closed. Now he knows where the book is. Boumé will go on harassing me, as only he knows how.